Lesson 38. That's the last lecture on the philosophy of the Kleshas from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2, Sutra 20. The seer is pure consciousness, but though pure, appears to see through the mind. Consciousness is universal. Every soul would observe, would see the same thing. But that is the seer with a capital S in this sutra. But we appear to see through the mind. The seer, that is the crown chakra, is objective, is not conditioned. The mind, however, is colored, is conditioned. So, although the seer in every person would see exactly the same, no matter your nationality, no matter your culture, where you come from, you would all see the same thing. But the problem that mankind is facing is that what the seer sees is translated or interpreted by the mind. And it is the mind that gives it a personal twist. So what is universally the same for everybody, if only you could see through pure consciousness, that perception is changed by the conditioning of the mind. This explains why when we look at something, everybody sees something different. There are psychological tests based on this principle. You have the Rorschach test, where they show you ink blots, and every person sees something different in those ink blots, and the psychiatrist or the psychologist can develop insight into your conditioning and your past experiences based on what you see in those ink blots. That is this. We look at the same thing. Universally, everybody would come to the same conclusion, but the way that you look at it, the way that you interpret what you're looking at, is determined by your conditioning, the conditioning of past experiences. A couple of sutras later, we will come to a solution for this problem, which of course is obvious. But Sutra 21 tells us, the very being of the seen is for his sake. Prakriti, meaning Prakriti exists only for your sake. God created the world for man. The world is there for us to experience, to grow, to develop, to reach the highest goal, which is enlightenment. We learn through experience. But most people don't learn because they are suffering from the first klesha, ignorance, which is the cause of all our suffering. The moment that we start living consciously, every experience becomes a learning moment. Because the conscious person will always ask, why is this happening? What caused this to happen? How is this relating to me? And what is my responsibility in all this? So from the moment that we start living consciously, ignorance gradually turns into wisdom. Ignorance gradually is transformed into insight and knowledge, because you start questioning everything, because you start undergoing every experience in life from that moment on consciously. It is very important, and I've said it many times before because it is so important, that we start understanding, that we start accepting that everything that happens in life has a reason and a purpose. The reason why mankind is suffering, the reason why mankind is experiencing misery all the time, is because we passively, out of ignorance, we feel victim of everything that is happening in our life. It is because of ego that we identify with what is happening, and we just immerse ourselves, we drown ourselves in that misery. Once you understand that everything has a reason and a purpose, you reduce the suffering tremendously. Because the moment that you are hit, the moment you have an experience, you are hit with the suffering, but you then quickly go into the yogi mode. You then quickly use your consciousness to process what is happening, to understand what is happening. So the reason for things to happen is to teach us about ourselves and to teach us about the world around us. And the purpose is that we grow and develop and reach higher levels of maturity. And in terms of yoga, of course, the goal is enlightenment and liberation. So start living life. If you start living life in this way, everything starts making sense. You stop struggling, even when you are experiencing hard times. Because hard times especially have the purpose to teach you something that you didn't know yet. Especially when you follow your heart, you have certain goals in life. And some of those goals may seem impossible to achieve. The way you get ready to achieve those impossible goals is hardship. It is the hardship that prepares you for the next step in life. But if you don't see that, you just suffer from the hardship without any development, without any positive outcome. And all is misery and suffering in our eyes. While on the other hand, when we see that the hardship has a constructive purpose, you don't see it as a negative anymore. You welcome it because you know that it is going to help you to grow And it will help you to prepare for the next big step that you want to take in life. So all in all, life is wonderful, even when you live in misery, because the misery now starts to work for you instead of to work against you. Sutra 22. Although it becomes non-existent for him whose purpose has been fulfilled, it continues to exist for others on account of being common to others besides him. Yogis, when you start practicing yoga, you slowly but certainly start to change. One of the big changes that takes place is that you become conscious and that you start doing everything more conscious than before. It's called mindfulness. As a result, you become much more logical in the way that you do things. It's called common sense. In English, it's called common sense. But my opinion is that common sense is not common at all, because most people are lacking common sense. In Dutch, we don't say common sense, we call it logic. And that's a much better word, because common sense suggests that it's common. Most people are lacking it. But every yogi develops common sense because of consciousness and increased sensitivity. What is this sutra about? Your change. This sutra is a warning. Your change is very gradual. It's so gradual, you know that you are changing, but it's so gradual that you don't fully understand how that makes you different from other people. It's like if you have a child that you see every day, you don't see the child growing. Because the change every day is so little, you don't see the child growing. But if you have a niece that you see once a year, you see suddenly a big growth. Your niece has grown a lot in the 1 year that you didn't meet your family. You are looking at yourself as that child, your own child, that is growing very gradually, but you don't see it happening because you see it every day. So you do not realize how much you have changed in comparison with other people. You are becoming a perfectionist because you develop common sense. Things you didn't see before, you now start to realize. And as a result, things that you do more completely. You become a perfectionist, hopefully not in an ugly way. But the result of the things that you do just gets better and better as a result. The problem this sutra is addressing is that you look at other people and you start seeing their imperfections. And if you don't pay attention, and many people don't, because they don't realize it, you become irritated because of that. You become angry at those people for their imperfection. This sutra is asking you, do not forget where you come from. Do not forget that before yoga, you were just as imperfect as they were. So open your heart. Be compassionate. They didn't have the benefit of yoga that you had. So perfectionism is good as long as it is not with attention, with a fanaticism, with the acceptance of imperfection, especially when it compares with other people. So don't forget where you come from. It's like, in another way, you see this often with parents. Parents scold their children for being a child. And when children play and they get dirty in the playground, they scold their children for being dirty. But they forget, 30 years ago, they were a child themselves. And they were playing in the dirt and they didn't care. And so never forget where you come from. And when you look at old people also, young people often have the arrogance of being judgmental about old people, not realizing that one day they will be that old person themselves. See? So try to always put yourself in another person's shoes, but also realize it is a privilege that you are losing your ignorance more and more. You develop more and more common sense, logic thought. But other people are not on the same path of development as you are. So do not judge them harshly for that. Instead, remind yourself that you were once like them, and now you have the privilege to have outgrown that. You could call this one of the diseases of the disciple, the arrogance that some spiritual people have because they feel superior to other people, to the normal people. Sutra 23 is answering the question, why are we here on earth? Why do we have to suffer so many lives of misery? Sutra 23 says, the purpose of the coming together of the Purusha and Prakriti is gaining by the Purusha of the awareness of your true nature, their true nature, and the unfoldment of powers inherent in you and Prakriti. Prakriti is matter, so that is the world around us, everything. Purusha is the soul. Why did your soul come from the universe down to this earth to live through all the challenges and obstacles and suffering and misery? This sutra tells us what I've told you before also on various occasions, that is to experience. Because the moment that you start experiencing consciously, which is the whole purpose of yoga, it leads to this development that eventually leads to the ending of rebirth, or what's it called again in English? Reincarnation, the cycle of reincarnation, the million lives that we have to live through to burn our karma and reach enlightenment. So the world is your playground. Now, people who are not conscious, people who are not aware, they use the world also as a playground, but they are destroying it at the same time. We are destroying our own environment out of ignorance, thinking that it doesn't matter. The earth is indestructible and what have you. But it is more and more clear that the earth is not indestructible. The earth is a living organism that is getting very sick now as a result of our uncontrolled activities. I think as a yogi you intuitively feel the need to protect the environment. It is the environment that allows us to live in the first place. So the world is our playground. Use it to your advantage to grow and develop, but not out of greed destroy it, as you can see everywhere around you. Now, why do we suffer? Sutra 24. I answered that question already. The reason why we suffer is because we don't realize suffering has a reason and a purpose. Sutra 24 says, the cause of your suffering is the lack of awareness of your real nature. Ignorance, the first klesha, is the cause of our suffering. It's the cause of all the kleshas that follow after it. Yoga gives us the tool to destroy ignorance by developing consciousness. The real nature that is mentioned here, that is soul consciousness, also mentioned a couple of times before. When we are born, we are pure. But from the moment that we are born, we are conditioned by our environment. It's the reason why every person will develop differently. Because of your upbringing, because of your culture, so the culture you were born in, the country you were born in, because of education, all these elements influence who we think we are, but has nothing to do with your true nature, your real nature, as this sutra is mentioning. Your real nature, that is your heart's content, your soul consciousness. And the moment that you start becoming aware of that, you notice that it has nothing to do with your culture, your upbringing, and your education. Because of this, you very often see that people who start on the spiritual path, they change their life. They change their career. Sometimes they change the country that they live in or the city that they live in. They sometimes feel a strong need. They feel that they are in the wrong relationship, and they will even sometimes change relationship as a result of this connection with the real self or the real nature. Sutra 25. What can we do about this? What can we do about the ignorance that is the cause of all the misery? The dissociation of Purusha and Prakriti brought about by the dispersion of avidya is the real remedy. And that is the liberation of the seer. Purusha, the soul, Prakriti, the material world. People identify with the material world and do not realize they have a soul or soul consciousness. Even though they are able to talk about soul, they do not fully comprehend what it really means. Leave alone that they are aware of their own true characteristics or Purusha, as it is called here, soul consciousness. The sutra suggests that to separate Purusha and Prakriti, you need to deal with the ignorance. To develop self or soul consciousness and to get rid of the conditioning that we have undergone since we were born by upbringing, culture, education, the media, of course, very huge influence. We need to separate the two. You separate them simply by consciousness. Avidya is ignorance. Practicing yoga leads to consciousness, where slowly ignorance is replaced by insight and wisdom. And that is how you gradually reduce misery and suffering. So, when you read the sutra and you do not experience yoga yourself, it looks like the sutra or Patanjali is suggesting that technically you can separate the two. That doesn't work like that. It is a dynamic process, developing consciousness, and every day learning a little bit more. Every day gaining a little bit more insight. So it's a very slow and gradual process where ignorance slowly is replaced by more and more insight and wisdom, knowledge. So how do we do that? How do we dissociate Purusha and Prakriti through the dispersion of avidya? Sutra 26, 27 and 28 give the answer to that in steps. Sutra 26 says we get rid of ignorance through the uninterrupted practice of the awareness of the real. So the uninterrupted practice of the awareness of the real is the means of dispersion of avidya or ignorance. How do you practice awareness of the real in an uninterrupted way? Sutra 27. In his case, the highest stage of enlightenment is reached by 7 stages. The highest stage of enlightenment is the 8th stage. What is this referring to? The path of yoga. The 8-folded path of yoga. The 7 stages are yama, niyama, pranayama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, leading to samadhi, the 8th stage. Samadhi, the mysterious practice that most people who think they are knowledgeable make out to be very complicated and difficult to obtain, is simply the stage where you are conscious as a result of your yoga practice. So samadhi is not difficult to obtain at all. There is a controlled form to practice it, but the suggestion here is that if you practice the first 7 stages of yoga up to meditation, samadhi is a natural result of that. Samadhi is contemplation. Contemplation allows you to rise above your conditioning and look at things in a universal way. And when you look at something from that perspective, and I look at something, the same thing, from that higher perspective, we both see the same thing. While when we look at it from a lower level of consciousness or lower level of perception, we see 2 different things because we are conditioned to look at it in a different way. So Sutra 28 concludes. There is mention of viveka khyati. Viveka khyati is supreme discrimination, so the highest level of consciousness. How do you develop the highest levels of consciousness? Sutta 28, from the practice of the component exercises of yoga on the destruction of impurity, your conditioning, arises spiritual illumination which develops into awareness of reality. Good. So long story short, practice, practice, practice. Yoga is the answer. Talking about yoga will not achieve anything. Reading books about yoga will not achieve anything. Dressing up like a yogi will not achieve anything. The only thing that really works is practice. Questions? All right, let's have a short break.